In 2009, Linda Carter, a 380-pound woman, left home during a tornado evacuation and was never seen again. For 9 years, her family waited for answers as investigators searched through dead-end leads and silence. Then, miles from where she was last spotted, 2 farmers stumbled on something in an open field, a discovery that would reopen her case and cast the mystery in a harsh, new light. It was May 25, 2009, when the National Weather Service gave a tornado warning for the small town of Pilger, Nebraska. The sirens started just after 6 p.m., ringing through the streets and across the open fields. Families rushed to grab what they could and head to the nearest shelter. Some took medicine, water, or small bags, while others left with nothing but the clothes they wore. The sky turned dark fast, and heavy clouds moved low. The wind picked up bits of trash and branches, blowing them across the road. Neighbors called to each other as they hurried to leave. By 6:30 p.m., the winds had grown stronger, and bursts of rain began to fall. Most people in town had already made it to the storm shelter near the school, while others stayed in basements or sturdy garages. One woman, however, never showed up. When the tornado touched down, tearing across fields and destroying several homes, no one noticed right away that she was gone. In the confusion of families trying to survive, her absence went unseen. Only later, when the winds calmed and people began checking on each other, did it become clear she was missing. Linda Carter was 42 years old when she disappeared during the tornado evacuation in Pilger. She had lived in the small Nebraska town most of her life and rarely traveled outside the county. People who knew her said she preferred the comfort of familiar places and familiar faces. Linda had grown up in Pilger, gone to the local school, and stayed close to her family even as many of her classmates moved away after graduation. By the time of the storm in 2009, she was living in a one-story home just a few blocks off the main road that cut through town. The house was modest and plain, but it was hers. Linda had never married and did not have children of her own, but she remained close with her older sister, Carol, and a cousin named Denise, who lived only a few houses away. They often helped one another with errands, meals, and small house repairs. On weekends, it was not unusual for Carol to drive Linda into Norfolk, the nearest city, so she could shop for groceries or refill her prescriptions. Linda did not drive long distances herself. She preferred to stay in town where everything was within reach and where she felt secure. Her daily routine was simple. She enjoyed watching television, listening to the radio, and reading magazines that her sister passed along. Linda also liked to cook basic meals at home, usually casseroles or soups, and she often made extra portions to share with family members. Because of her size, she did not move quickly, and walking for long periods was difficult. Still, she managed her life with the help of her family. Neighbors sometimes saw her sitting on her porch in the evenings, greeting people who walked by or waving to children riding their bikes. Linda weighed 380 pounds at the time of her disappearance. Her weight made her stand out in a small community where most people knew each other by name. Friends said it also shaped how she lived her life. She had knee pain that limited how far she could walk, and stairs were hard for her to manage. Getting in and out of vehicles sometimes took her extra time. Because of this, Linda often planned ahead for simple tasks, leaving early for appointments and leaning on relatives if she needed help with heavy lifting. Despite these struggles, she was not seen as helpless. Those who knew her said she was independent in spirit, determined to do what she could on her own, even if it took longer. Her family worried at times that her health problems, such as high blood pressure and diabetes, might make emergencies harder for her to handle. They often encouraged her to take part in community events or exercise groups, but Linda preferred quiet routines. She was private about her health and did not complain much. Her cousin Denise described her as a stubborn lady in her own gentle way. She meant that Linda did not like to be fussed over, even when she clearly needed help. Though she lived a quiet life, Linda was well liked by those around her. She was not known for having many close friends, but her family ties gave her support. People who knew her after her disappearance often recalled how steady and calm she seemed, even in stressful moments. That was part of why her vanishing during the tornado was so shocking to them. She was the kind of person others expected to see sitting on her porch, watching the world go by. Suddenly, she was gone, and the ordinary details of her life became the most important things people remembered. On May 25, 2009, Pilger, Nebraska, had been under a storm watch for most of the day. Local radio stations reminded residents to stay alert, and many people followed the sky closely, waiting for signs of trouble. By late afternoon, the clouds had grown darker and heavier. Just after 6 o'clock, the town's sirens sounded, warning everyone to move quickly to shelter. Linda Carter was at home when the sirens started. Denise later said Linda had been nervous about the weather all afternoon and mentioned she had packed some of her medicine in case she needed to leave quickly. When the alarm sounded, Linda gathered her jacket, purse, and the bag she had prepared. She stepped outside while the wind was already strong enough to scatter small pieces of trash along the street. Neighbors all around were on the move at the same time. Some were getting into their cars, heading toward the community storm shelter located near the school. Others were gathering children or locking up houses before moving to basements or garages. The entire neighborhood seemed to be rushing at once, each family focused on getting to safety before the storm reached them. By 6:20 p.m., the winds had picked up more, and bits of debris were flying through the air. Most families were already inside shelters or basements by then. A woman who left her house a little later than most said she noticed Linda near a stalled truck. She thought Linda might be heading toward Denise's house, which was only a short distance away. When the tornado finally touched down, it moved fast across open farmland and into the edge of Pilger. Houses were torn apart, trees snapped in half, and vehicles were flipped onto their sides. In those few minutes, people focused only on survival, holding doors closed, covering children, or staying low to the ground. When the storm passed, the town was left badly damaged. Families stepped out of shelters and basements to check on neighbors. Many houses were gone, power lines were down, and streets were blocked with debris. In the middle of this destruction, people began looking for one another. Parents called for their children, friends went to see if others had made it through, and families reunited with relief. It was during these first moments of checking that Linda's absence was noticed. Denise went to the shelter near the school, expecting to find her cousin there, but she wasn't. Volunteers who kept track of arrivals said Linda's name wasn't on the list, and no one remembered seeing her inside. Denise then checked Linda's house, but the front door was unlocked and the rooms were empty. Her belongings were gone, which showed she had left as planned, but she hadn't reached safety. Deputies later reviewed the same witness statements, which consistently placed Linda somewhere between her house and the corner of the street, but no further reports. None of the neighbors saw her after the storm hit, and no one could explain where she had gone in the short gap between leaving her home and the tornado striking. For a woman known to move carefully and stay close to family, her disappearance puzzled everyone. If she had fallen nearby or been injured, searchers expected she would have been found quickly. Yet nothing, no purse, no medicine, not even a shoe or piece of clothing turned up that night. The tornado had caused destruction across the town, but it did not explain why Linda seemed to vanish completely. By the end of the night, as families counted losses and gathered what little they had left, Linda's family faced a different kind of fear. The storm had passed, but her absence remained. For Denise, her sister Carol, and others who loved her, the worry was immediate and heavy. What began as an effort to survive a natural disaster had turned into the start of a mystery that no one in Pilger could yet understand. The morning after the tornado, Pilger was quiet but broken. Streets were covered with branches, power lines lay tangled on the ground, and homes stood as piles of scattered wood and metal. Emergency crews had worked through the night to rescue the injured, but with the first daylight came a new priority: finding those still unaccounted for. By sunrise on May 26th, search teams were organized by the Stanton County Sheriff's Office, the Nebraska State Patrol, and local fire departments. Volunteers from nearby towns arrived to help, carrying shovels, flashlights, and heavy gloves. The names of the missing were passed around to each group. On that list was Linda Carter. Crews split into smaller teams, each assigned to different areas of town. Some started at the storm shelter near the school to double-check records and talk with those inside. Others walked the main road leading out of town, looking for signs of people who might not have made it to safety. Basements, garages, and damaged houses were searched one by one. Firefighters went through collapsed structures carefully, making sure no one was trapped beneath the debris. One team focused on the fields just outside of town, where the tornado had tossed cars and scattered farm equipment. They moved in lines, calling Linda's name and scanning for anything out of place. The fields were muddy from heavy rain, making it difficult to walk, but volunteers pressed on, convinced that anyone who had been caught outside might have ended up there. Despite hours of work, they found no trace of her. Back inside town, deputies checked Linda's house more closely. The structure was damaged, but still standing, with broken windows and part of the roof peeled away. Inside, it was clear she had left before the storm. Her purse and medicine were gone, and there was no sign she had returned afterward. Nothing suggested she had stayed behind, which confirmed what neighbors and family had already said. As the day went on, the search widened. Dogs were brought in from neighboring counties to help track scents, but heavy wind and rain made the job nearly impossible. The tornado had scattered debris for miles, and any trail Linda might have left was likely erased. Searchers knew that in such conditions, even experienced dogs could not reliably follow a scent. Volunteers also checked drainage ditches and low-lying areas where floodwater had collected. These spots were dangerous, filled with sharp metal, broken wood, and water that was difficult to see through. Crews used poles to probe beneath the surface, worried that someone could have been swept into the water during the storm. Again, nothing turned up. For Linda's family, the search was agonizing. Her sister Carol stayed close to deputies, giving them details about Linda's clothing and what she might have carried. Denise joined groups walking the roads and calling her cousin's name, even when search leaders advised her to rest. Both women clung to the hope that Linda had been injured, but was still alive, maybe waiting for help under the rubble. As the hours passed with no results, their worry deepened into fear. By the end of the first full day, no sign of Linda had been found. Crews gathered in the firehouse to review their progress. They had covered the shelter, her neighborhood, nearby roads, ditches, and open fields. Every lead seemed to circle back to the same point. Linda had left her house, been seen on her street, and then vanished somewhere in the short distance between there and the school shelter. How she could disappear in such a small area left searchers puzzled. The next day, May 27th, more people joined the search, including volunteers from nearby towns. Members of the National Guard also came to help, bringing machines to clear the wreckage and make the search area bigger. Helicopters flew above, looking over fields and riverbanks for any sign of Linda or her belongings. Still, nothing was found. Deputies started to wonder if the tornado had carried her farther than anyone thought. The storm had thrown cars and even heavy farm equipment across great distances, so it seemed possible. Search teams spread out to check farmland miles away, but again, there were no results. By the end of the second day, search leaders admitted they had little to go on. Unlike other cases where debris or clothing gave clues, there was nothing to connect Linda to any of the sites checked. It was as though she had vanished in the chaos of the storm, leaving her family with no explanation. The official search would continue in the days ahead, but the first 48 hours had already made clear how difficult the task would be. In the weeks after the tornado, the search for Linda Carter slowly shifted from an emergency response to a longer investigation. Deputies from the Stanton County Sheriff's Office continued to check leads during the summer of 2009. They interviewed neighbors who had seen Linda walking on the evening of the tornado. Some wondered if she had tried to make it to her cousin Denise's house, while others thought she may have collapsed in the street and been caught up in the storm's debris. But no evidence supported either idea. By August of that year, local authorities admitted that there were no solid leads. Deputies expanded the search area to include fields farther outside of town, ditches along country roads, and even nearby rivers. They asked farmers and landowners to keep an eye out for anything unusual. Despite these efforts, nothing turned up. Over the following months, the case grew quieter. Tornado damage across Pilger demanded attention, and many residents were busy repairing homes and businesses. For Linda's family, however, the search never ended. Her sister Carol continued to call the sheriff's office for updates. As the first year went by, deputies took another look at Linda's case. They went over the same ideas again. Maybe the tornado had carried her farther than anyone expected. Maybe she was buried under rubble that crews had already cleaned up. Another thought was that she might have left the area quietly on her own. The third idea never felt likely to those who knew her best. Linda was deeply connected to her family and had no reason to leave them without a word. Deputies also pointed out that her medical needs would have made it difficult for her to survive without her prescriptions. Still, with no body and no belongings, investigators could not close the case. By the 5th anniversary, the case was considered cold. The Stanton County Sheriff's Office still had an open file on Linda, but no active searches were being carried out. Instead, investigators relied on tips or reports from farmers and residents in the area. From time to time, landowners found bones in fields, but these usually turned out to be animal remains. Each call raised hopes briefly, only to end in disappointment. Through all of this, Linda's family continued to honor her memory quietly. They held small gatherings on her birthday, sharing stories about her life and the simple routines she had loved. They reminded one another of her kindness and her calm presence. These moments gave them some comfort, but the absence of answers always lingered in the background. By the time nearly a decade had passed, Linda Carter's name had become a quiet but lasting part of Pilger's history. For her family, the years were marked by waiting and wondering. For investigators, it was an unsolved case with no clear explanation, and for the community, it was a reminder of how fragile life could be, and how even in the middle of a shared disaster, one person's fate could remain unknown. In the spring of 2018, nearly 9 years after the tornado tore through Pilger, 2 farmers were preparing a field just a few miles outside of town. The land had been used for crops for decades, and each season the soil was tilled and replanted. That day was no different at first. The men drove their equipment across the wide, flat rows, checking the ground as they worked. It was a routine part of their lives, something they had done many times before. But that morning, what seemed like an ordinary task soon turned into something unexpected. One of the farmers noticed something unusual along the edge of the field. At first, he thought it was a piece of old farm equipment or debris left behind from past storms. Small bits of metal and wood sometimes turned up after heavy winds, so it wasn't rare to find odd items in the soil. But as he got closer, he realized it wasn't just broken scrap. There were bones, partly covered by dirt. They weren't shaped like animal bones he recognized from years of working the land. These looked human. The farmers stopped their work immediately. Unsure of what they had uncovered, they called the county sheriff's office. Deputies arrived quickly and marked off the area, telling the farmers to stay back. Within hours, the site was treated as a potential crime scene. Investigators carefully examined the ground, collecting each piece they could find. It was clear right away that the bones had been there for years, weathered by time and soil. Alongside the bones were personal items. A faded purse was found buried a short distance away, its leather cracked and worn from years in the ground. Inside were small objects that had survived the elements, a rusted key ring with 2 house keys still attached, the remains of a plastic pill bottle, and a few coins stuck together with dirt. Though damaged, these items provided immediate clues. Deputies believed they matched the belongings reported missing when Linda Carter vanished in 2009. Investigators worked slowly, collecting everything from the site. Pieces of clothing were found as well, though they were fragile and torn after years of exposure. A section of fabric, faded but still recognizable as part of a blouse, was pulled from the soil. Family members later confirmed that Linda had owned similar clothing. Every detail added weight to the growing belief that the remains were hers. Once the recovery was complete, the bones were sent to the State Forensic Laboratory for testing. Specialists examined them to confirm whether they were human, and if so, to determine identity. The process took time. DNA samples were compared against those of Linda's surviving relatives, including her sister Carol. When the results came back, they confirmed what many had already suspected. The remains belonged to Linda Carter. The news spread quickly through Pilger. For years, the question of what had happened to Linda had hung over the town. Some had feared she would never be found at all. Others had quietly held out hope that one day something would turn up. The discovery in the farmer's field gave the community an answer, though it was not the one anyone had wished for. With confirmation, deputies went back through the old 2009 witness statements. Most of them mentioned families rushing to shelter and cars stalling in the streets, including one truck near the corner where Linda was last seen. Back then, it was brushed off as storm confusion, but now, 9 years later, that detail stood out. Investigators traced the truck to Matt, a neighbor who had lived only a few blocks from Linda. That afternoon, they stopped by his house. At first, he said he didn't remember much. It had all been chaos. But when the deputies explained they were going back over everything carefully, his nerves showed. He fidgeted, looked down at his hands, and after a long pause, admitted he had kept something to himself for years. He said his truck had stalled the night of the tornado. The engine cut out, and the wind rocked the cab hard enough to make him think it might tip over. Rain pounded the windshield so hard he could barely see outside, and bits of metal and wood clanged against the doors. When he tried to open the door, the wind yanked it so violently that he thought it would rip off. Scared, he slammed it shut and stayed inside. That's when he saw Linda. Through the blur of rain, she came into view, moving slowly, clutching her purse tight. Her jacket snapped in the wind, and every step looked like it took all her strength. She leaned forward, trying to fight her way through. When she spotted his truck, she turned toward it. Matt admitted he cracked the door just enough to hear her. Over the roar of the storm, he caught pieces of her voice, maybe calling his name, maybe just asking for help. Her face, he said, looked desperate. Then a slab of tin roofing shot past and slammed against the truck, loud enough to rattle the whole cab. The wind nearly pulled the door out of his hands. In panic, he slammed it shut and locked it, heart racing. He sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel, too afraid to move. Through the glass, he saw Linda stumble forward a few more steps. A sudden gust shoved her sideways. Debris swirled around, branches, metal, scraps of roofing spinning so fast it was hard to tell what was what. In a flash of lightning, he caught one last glimpse of her raising an arm to shield herself. Then she was gone, swallowed by the wind and the flying debris. When he finished, Matt's voice shook. He told deputies he had replayed that moment for years, telling himself it wouldn't have made a difference. Maybe the storm would have taken them both. But deep down, he knew she had reached for him, and he hadn't helped. When deputies shared Matt's account with the family, the room fell silent. For Carol and Denise, the details cut deep. They had spent nearly a decade imagining what might have happened, but hearing that a neighbor had seen Linda alive that night and done nothing was painful. Carol admitted later that her first reaction was anger. She couldn't understand how someone could sit frozen while Linda, struggling against the storm, asked for help. They were also told about Linda's personal things that they've found. Each detail confirmed that Linda had left her house prepared, just as they remembered. She had taken the things she needed most, intending to reach shelter. Instead, she had somehow ended up in the field miles away. Investigators later explained that the tornado's power likely played the largest role in moving her. Tornadoes are known to carry debris for long distances, sometimes several miles. It was possible that Linda had been caught in the winds after leaving her house and brought into the countryside, far beyond where most searches had taken place in 2009. The field where she was discovered had been used season after season, but if her remains had been buried under enough soil or tangled in debris, they could have been overlooked until weather and farming finally exposed them. The condition of the items matched this theory. The purse was worn but intact, and the keys were rusted but still recognizable. The pill bottle had no label left, but its size and shape were consistent with the type Linda used for her prescriptions. These small details mattered, giving her family tangible proof after years of uncertainty. When the results were announced publicly, the sheriff's office emphasized that no foul play was suspected. The circumstances pointed strongly toward the tornado as the cause of Linda's disappearance. There were no signs of violence, and nothing suggested she had left on her own. While many questions could never be answered, such as the exact moment she was swept up or how far the winds carried her, the discovery provided enough evidence to bring the official search to an end. What had been a painful mystery for 9 years finally had a resolution. For her family, the discovery brought mixed emotions. On one hand, it was heartbreaking to know for sure that Linda had died that night. On the other hand, the confirmation brought relief. The years of wondering were over. Linda was given a proper burial. Her family arranged a simple service attended by relatives, neighbors, and friends who had known her over the years. For her family, the burial brought both sadness and relief. After 9 years of uncertainty, the hardest part of never knowing was finally over. With Linda laid to rest, they could stop searching and remember her as she was in life. Quiet but kind, strong-willed, and steady even in hard times. Neighbors who attended the service spoke about how often they had thought of her over the years. One woman said she couldn't walk past Linda's old house without wondering where she had gone. Another remembered seeing her on the porch, and how strange it felt that such a familiar sight had suddenly disappeared. In a small town where everyone notices when a face is missing, Linda's absence had left a deep impression. The discovery gave people permission to stop wondering and instead honor her memory. Matt showed up quietly at her burial. He stood toward the back, not speaking, not drawing attention. For the first time in almost a decade, he faced Linda again, not in the storm, but in the silence of a graveside service. To some, it didn't matter anymore what he did that night. To others, his guilt could never be shaken. But for Matt, being there was the only way he knew how to say goodbye, to stand witness one last time, even if he hadn't been able to do it when she needed him most. The community of Pilger responded with sympathy. Neighbors in Pilger had mixed feelings about it, and each has a different take on Matt, since he's confirmed to be the last person Linda is in touch with. Some sympathized with Matt, saying anyone could freeze in a storm like that. Others whispered that they would have done whatever it took to help. For the farmers who had found her, the experience left a lasting impression. They later said that they had not expected their day's work to uncover something so important. Though it was a difficult discovery, they were glad to have played a role in bringing answers to Linda's family. Their field, like much of Pilger, had carried scars from the storm. Now it also held the final chapter of a story that had stretched across nearly a decade. In the end, Linda's case became a reminder of the force of nature and the fragility of human life. The tornado that hit Pilger in 2009 had changed the town forever. For 9 years, it left one family searching and waiting. In 2023, the soil finally gave back what the storm had taken, allowing Linda to be laid to rest and her loved ones to begin healing. With Linda Carter finally found, life in Pilger moved forward, but her story stayed with the people who had known her. The tornado of 2009 was already remembered as one of the darkest days in the town's history. Homes had been lost, landmarks erased, and lives forever changed. For years, Linda's absence had been part of that memory, an unanswered question that added to the pain. The discovery in 2023 closed that chapter, but it also brought a new way of remembering her. For the wider community, her story became a reminder of both the strength and vulnerability of small towns facing natural disasters. Tornadoes had always been part of life in Nebraska, but the Pilger storm had been unusually severe. In its wake, people learned that even careful plans and quick responses could not guarantee safety. Linda had done what everyone else had done, yet the storm still claimed her. That reality unsettled many, but also underscored the unpredictable power of nature.